Chapter 6. Mr. Guy and his killer dog. Mum, I didn't hear you arrive. Where's Dad? Is he with you? Gibbs' questions came thick and fast. I hung back behind him. I don't know why. Your Dad's upstairs. He's having a bath, Mum replied. Mum's face looked so strange. It was gaunt and lean, as if in a few hours she had lost all the flesh from her cheeks. She looked so tired. At any second, she might keel over. What happened, Mum? Gib asked earnestly. Is it all over? Is it all sorted? I wish. Your Dad has to give up his passport. They want to make sure he doesn't skip the country with the bank's supposed million, Mum said bitterly. Once a date for the trial is set, then he'll have to appear in court again. But at least he's home now, I said. But at least he's home, Mum agreed. I watched as she leaned against the door, her chin against her chest. Now, I want you two to promise me something. I don't want either of you to say a word about this business to your Dad. Not one single word. Do you understand? I nodded. Yes, Mum, Gibbs said, adding, Can we see Dad? Is he all right? He's fine. He wants to see you after his bath. Then I want him to get some sleep. He's very tired. Mum, what's going to happen about Dad's job? I couldn't help but asking. I mean, will he be able to clear his name when he gets back to work on Monday? He's been suspended from work until the outcome of the trial is known, Mum said, her voice as hard as granite. Eric, the systems manager, said he'd try and help us, and I know Beth will do what she can. We'll just have to keep our fingers crossed that they can find something. And with that, Mum went back into the house. After she'd gone, the garden, the whole world was silent. No birds, no traffic, no nothing. At least, if there were sounds, then I couldn't hear them. There was just Gib and me staring after her. I forced myself to break the silence. We're going to need Chelsea's PC, I said softly. I was just thinking that, Gib said. Without looking at me, I'll go and check it out. We both went into the house. I went upstairs to my room. I waited by the bedroom door until I heard Dad emerging from the bathroom. Then I ran out onto the landing. Dad had his white toweling dressing gown and his back was towards me as he closed the bathroom door. Dad, whatever else I wanted to say vanished out of my head when I saw him. I thought Mum looked bad. But Dad looked far, far worse. All the life and laughter had gone from his face. Only as soon as he saw me, he tried to smile. He straightened up and ran his hand over his damp hair. Hello, Victoria. Oh, good grief. Feels like I haven't seen you in weeks rather than just one day, Dad said, holding out his arms. I walked into them and he hugged me. I nodded slowly. How are you? He asked. I nodded again. You're very quiet, Pumpkin, Dad smiled. That did it. My eyes started to leak and I was off again. I covered my face with my hands, too upset to be embarrassed, too miserable to care. The next thing I knew, Dad was smoothing down my hair and sighing. Victoria, don't cry, he said soothingly. I'm all right, I promise. And this thing will never get to trial. The bank will find out who did that. The bank will find out before then that I didn't take the money. How will they find out? I sniffed. I may have been suspended, but I still have friends at the bank, Dad replied. Like Aunt Beth and Eric? I asked. That's right, Dad smiled. Eric's a good systems manager, and Beth knows her way around most of the programs on the system. Between the two of them, they should be able to find out something that will help me. Do you really think so? I asked. Dad nodded. How did they get that money into your account? I whispered. Dad's smile faded. Well, if I knew that, I'd be halfway towards solving this mystery myself. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, feeling better now that we were talking about it. Why should anyone want to put $1 million in your account? That's what I can't understand, I complained. Dad nodded. If I knew that, then I'd be 3/4 of the way towards solving the mystery. And the last quarter? I asked. Dad's face was stony. Finding out who did all this. Do you have any idea who that might be? That's just it. I don't. Nothing definite at any rate, Dad sighed. And even if I did know for sure who it was, that wouldn't help. I need proof. Concrete. indisputable proof. I looked at Dad. Neither of us spoke for a few moments. Proof that someone else is guilty to prove that you're innocent, I said slowly. Exactly. Right now I don't see how I can prove my innocence otherwise. Dad, enough questions, Victoria. All I want to do now is sleep for a week, Dad said. Mum came out of their bedroom. She glared at me. I'd forgotten what she said in the garden. When Dad went into their bedroom, Mum looked at me and shook her head. Oh, Vicky, she sighed before following Dad into the room and closing the door behind her. I chewed on my bottom lip, feeling about 2 centimetres high. I had a pain in my chest and my throat felt as if it was full of sand. Unwanted again. I moved towards the door, ready to knock and say sorry. I hadn't done it deliberately. I'd just forgotten. David, I'm sorry. I asked Vicky not to mention the bank. I heard Mum's muffled voice through the closed door. I grimaced at her words, feeling worse than terrible. Why not? Dad asked. I'm glad she wanted to talk about it. It's better than what everyone else is doing, skirting around the subject, but still dying to know all the ins and outs and in-betweens. But I don't want you to be upset any more by this business, Mum said. You're the one who shouldn't get upset, Laura. It's you I'm worried about, Dad replied. I didn't mean to listen, but my feet had forgotten how to move. Do you know what burns me up about this whole thing? Dad said, his voice louder with anger now. If I was some smart aleck hacker from outside who'd been accused of taking all the money, the bank would be doing everything, their very best, to keep this all quiet. They'd probably even let me keep the money, as long as I told them how I did it. David, Mum interrupted. Oh, all right, maybe that's not quite true, Dad replied. But what gets me is I work at the bank, so I must be guilty. They even think they know how I did it. Beth told me they reckon I set something up in my checking software. So it's David Gibson, off to prison and throw away the key. But I didn't do it. I didn't do it. I'm so angry I want to hit something. I know, David, Mum soothed. Calm down, dear. I can't, Dad sighed. I've been caught up in a trap, and if I'm not careful, I'll end up in prison with no one but you and the kids giving a damn about me. I walked away after that. I couldn't bear to listen to any more. I trudged downstairs and out into the garden, feeling very scared. Vicky, I've been looking for you all over the house, Gib moaned as soon as he saw me. You should have looked out here then, I replied, not bothering to look up from the listings Gib and I had been going through earlier and that I was looking at now. It was late evening, the sun was getting low in the burnt orange-red sky, and the garden was still and peaceful. Usually on Saturday evenings, I went around to Gail's or Maggie's house. We'd go and see a film or go on a pizza crawl, but today I hadn't felt like it. I'd spent the whole afternoon thinking and reading through the listings. We can't use Chelsea's PC, Gib said, flopping down beside me. Why not? I frowned at Gib. Won't he let us use it? Did he change his mind? No, it's not that, Gib sighed. Once I'd explained to him why we needed it, Chauncey said we could use it whenever we wanted to. But he said his router is playing up, so we've got no way of getting onto the internet to connect to Universal Bank Computer. You didn't tell Chelsea the whole truth, did you? I asked, shocked. Gib frowned at me. Of course I did. Why not? He's my friend. He won't tell anyone. But just thinking that Chauncey knew all about Dad made me go cold all over. It would be just another thing that for Chauncey to grin at me about. You had no right to Chauncey our business, I said furiously. Gib's frown deepened. Listen, Chauncey's my friend, not yours. I'll tell him what I like. And Dad is your real dad, not mine. So this whole thing is none of my business, I concluded. I hadn't meant to say that, I swear. It just slipped out. I didn't say that, Gib said quietly, but that's what you meant. If I remember yesterday's little speech correctly, my voice was lemon bitter. Now that it had been brought out into the open, I couldn't get it out of my mind. I had no real aunts, no real uncles, just some very distant cousins who lived in America, whom I'd never seen. My close relatives were those I'd acquired when I'd been adopted. Neither my real mum nor my real dad had any brothers or sisters. Now, more than ever, I wished with all my heart that they did. I'd never felt so lonely. Picking up the listings, I went indoors. So what now, Victoria? I asked myself. I sat down on the sofa in the living room and leaned my head back, trying to think. It seemed to me that no matter what I did, Gib would never accept me. I'd never be part of his family. But if I prove Dad didn't take that money, then I'll belong. Then Dad will want me to stay, and maybe Mum too, I thought to myself. I mean, that wouldn't be my only reason for wanting to prove it, but it could be one of them. But now I wasn't even sure if I wanted to belong. Much as I loved Mum and Dad, they'd never be my real Mum and Dad. Did that matter? Surely it was up for me to decide where I fitted in. If I said the Gibsons were my family, who could contradict me? The opinion of anyone outside the family wasn't, relevant. And as for the family's opinion, well, Mum and Dad had adopted me. No one had forced them to do that. So there was just Gib. Think of something, Victoria, I told myself. What was it Dad always said? Every problem has a logical solution. Well, I couldn't see the solution to this one to save my life. When one or two things went wrong, it was easy to think that nothing would go right. I'd have to have it out with Gib once this business at the bank was sorted. But my luck was non-existent, even as far as that was concerned. I needed a PC with an internet connection. It was that simple. Only Dad's PC had been taken away, and Chauncey's couldn't get onto the web. So where would I find what I needed? There were plenty of PCs at our school that would allow me to go online, of course. But short of breaking into the school, how could I get to them? Short of breaking into the school. I sat up abruptly. I couldn't. Could I? I didn't see that I had much choice. It was that or nothing. I knew Dad said Aunt Beth and Eric and others were helping him at the bank, but what if they couldn't? They all knew more about computing than I did, but I couldn't just sit by and watch Dad end up in prison, not without doing something to help. The way I saw it, I couldn't hurt anything by trying to prove Dad was innocent, but breaking into the school. Does that mean you're not going to help Dad anymore? Gib was standing at the living room door. Wishing he'd leave me alone, I snapped. It doesn't mean anything of the kind. How are you going to get the information you need from the live system at Universal Bank? Gib asked. I thought of a way, a possible way, I said slowly. Silence. Aren't you going to tell me? Gib frowned. I'm not sure. It's dangerous. It'd be better if you didn't know. There's no point in us both getting into trouble. I'm part of this too, Gib said angrily. Shh, I said, pointing to the ceiling. I didn't want to disturb Dad. So what's your plan? I looked at Gib, wondering if I dared to tell him. We use a school computer, I replied. Gib stared at me. When? No time like the present, I said. Gib glanced down at his watch and frowned. But it's almost 8 o'clock. School's locked up. Like I said, you don't have to help me with this. I stood up, picked up the storage case with Dad's CDs and memory keys in it, and pushed past Gib into the hall. I put on my jacket. I'm coming with you, Gib whispered. You don't think I'd let you do this by yourself, do you? Scribble a quick note to Mum and Dad, telling them that we've gone to see a film or something, and let's go, I ordered. Gib opened his mouth to argue, then shut it again. It's just as well. I really wasn't in the mood for an argument. It's just as well. I was really in the mood for an argument at that point. It was only when we were actually on our way to the school that I began to believe what we were about to do. When there's no traffic about, I'll help you climb over the school railings, Gib told me as we were approaching the road where our school was. Help me? It's more likely that I'll be the one helping you, I scoffed. Besides, we might not have to climb over anything. Of course we will. The gates will be locked on a Saturday, Gib replied. Supposing we're seen, I began. We've just got to make sure we're not seen, Gib interrupted. I was just going to say, we'd better have our story straight, I continued impatiently. All right then, Gib said. You've left something in your locker, and we want it. We need it before Monday. Like what? I asked. I don't know. Present for Mum? Why have I got her a present? It's not her birthday. You're not helping much, Vicky, Gib complained, his arms folded. All right. We'll say that then, I conceded. But Mum's present is in your locker, not mine. I've got enough on my plate at the moment, what with Miss Hiff's letter about the Hacker Supreme. Oh yeah, I'd forgotten about that, Gib replied. I hadn't. We walked in silence around the corner of the road. Borough Vale was at the other end of the street. I reckon the best place to get over the railings is behind the goalposts. There's practically no hedge left there. It's been battered too much from us getting the balls back that missed the goal. A privet hedge stood between the school fields and buildings, and the railings which ran at least 2/3 of the way around the school boundary. Will you be able to lift me? I asked Gib doubtfully. Of course I can. Gib sounded insulted. And once we're in, I've got my torch and some string and some sweets if we should get stuck in there overnight. What's the string for? I asked. I thought we could tie it to a railing and use it to find our way around out of school. But that's what the torch is for, I said, getting confused. Besides, we could both find our way out of school with blindfolds on. We come here every day, remember? But we might need the string. Anything might happen. I might drop the torch and break it, Gib said. I burst out laughing. Don't get carried away, Gib. We're not going to get stuck until morning, and you're not going to drop your torch. Okay, Gib pouted. The top of his ears a brilliant red. That still leaves one problem, though. Yes, I know, I said glumly. Neither of us had to say it. We both knew. Mr. Guy, the caretaker, and his killer dog, Jaws. Not that any of us had actually seen Jaws. Mr. Guy was always telling us that Jaws had to be kept chained up inside the caretaker's house during the day for our own protection. Well, if the dog was half as bad as Mr. Guy said, it would be a right snarling misery. A Rottweiler, or at the very least a great hulking brute of an Alsatian. Would Jaws be roaming around the school, ready to bite our legs off when he got the first sniff of us? I don't suppose you've come up with a master plan for dealing with the dog? I asked. Ah, that's where you're wrong. Yes, I have, Gib replied smugly. I'm all ears, I prompted. If we see a Jaws, or hear him, or even just suspect he's nearby, we do one simple thing. What's that? Run. I looked at Gib and we both cracked up laughing. You must have racked your brains all the way here to come up with that one, I said. At last we reached the school. What an anticlimax. The gate was wide open, and it seemed as if every light in the place was on. Ugh, so much for my torch, Gib said, disappointed. And so much for climbing the railings, I said, not disappointed. The smile on my face was so broad that it almost hurt. I forgot about the adult education classes that go on here. Gib snorted. He was really annoyed. Pinhead. We both strolled into the school. We passed the canteen first. It was full of people who completely ignored us. Next up the steps and along the quad and past the assembly hall. Just then, a small cocker spaniel came trotting up to us. Hello, boy, I smiled, bending to fuss behind its ears. Who do you belong to then? Jaws! Jaws! Here, boy! Mr. Guy came trotting up behind his dog. This was Jaws. I couldn't believe my eyes or my ears. Mr. Guy glared over his glasses at me and Gib. He had on dark slacks and a light blue polo shirt. His bald head gleamed like a snooker ball, and Jaws, who barely came up past my ankle, was sniffing and yapping at my feet. We couldn't help it. Gib and I laughed so hard. He was holding his side, and I had tears in my eyes. Here, I know you two, Mr. Guy said, not amused. You two come to the school here during the day, don't you? I've seen you knocking about. So what are you doing here then? And that question wiped the smiles right off of our faces.